Here's my story. I was married to my wife for 7 years. I knew something was off after several times I had arrived home from work to find only my teenage daughter at home and my wife missing. She would always tell me what her mom had instructed her to say. For example, she would say that her mom went grocery shopping to see a friend from work, or that she had to help someone with something. My daughter never seemed aware that she was lying, which was a relief. I didn't think my wife would have the nerve to burden our daughter with any secrets she kept from me. I was so frustrated that I decided to come home a little early for a few days. Each time I sat in my car down the street to see if my wife left. On the third day she did, and I followed her. She went to Boscov's, which initially gave me some relief because maybe she had been telling the truth each time. But then I saw the man she was meeting at the entrance. He was tall, handsome, and looked wealthy. He kissed my wife enthusiastically before they went inside. The next day was my wife's birthday, and I suspected that this was some kind of birthday shopping spree to cover up her absence. I went inside Boscov's and walked around close enough to see how they interacted. It was extremely romantic behavior. I started filming and it took a few minutes for me to catch him grabbing her butt. I was so angry I wanted to set the building on fire. I filmed for as long as I could, but then AP saw me staring at them. I left the building and got to my car, but before I drove away, I saw him come out with my wife's hand in his. She looked concerned and puzzled, trying to see who he was talking about. Hopefully she was feeling panicked like I was. I returned home and wondered what I should say to my daughter. She was 17, so she was old enough to handle adult issues, but either way, it was going to be really upsetting. I told her I saw her mom with another man, so I was going to stay at Grandma's for a while. She asked if she could come with me, because she had been thinking about helping Grandma with her garden. I thought that was the cutest and most uplifting thing I could have heard at that moment. We packed some bags and left without any tears or arguments. Grandma was excited to see us, and I felt like everything was going to be okay. My wife returned shortly after that to our empty house. I left her a note on the counter that I was the one who had been watching them, and I had proof that she was romantically involved with him. I told her to enjoy her birthday alone in an empty house because that's what she deserved. Unfortunately, the house was hers, so she was able to keep living there, but she couldn't have AP move in because he got arrested for doing some illegal things. I'm happy to report that my ex was heartbroken. She couldn't believe she had betrayed the happy and secure family we had built for a man who bought her things and stole stuff. She left me a lot of honest thoughts on voicemail, but she maintained a distant relationship with our daughter for years. To return to normal, I'm sad to say that she really started to hate the things about herself that reminded her of her mom. I told her she was her own person, a unique combination of two people's DNA, and unlike anyone else. I reminded her that she could only be in control of herself, her own decisions, and her emotions. I also reminded her that holding on to hatred or bitterness in your heart only leads to negative behavior. I suggested she start writing in a journal, and although she initially thought I was preaching, I noticed her becoming more joyful and grateful a few days later. She even spent time gardening with her grandmother and visiting her mom. OP, I am sorry that your wife gave up on your marriage and betrayed her own daughter. Your daughter looked up to her mom as an example of how a good woman behaves. However, the advice you gave her was spot on, and I believe she learned how not to behave from her mother's actions. Sometimes a negative example can be just as effective as a positive one. You are a wise father for noticing your daughter's struggles and offering her guidance and support. It must have been difficult for her to deal with issues and doubts caused by her mother's poor behavior. It's unfortunate that her mother was shallow and materialistic enough to be tempted by a man who promised to spoil her. Take your time finding a better and more honest woman. I wish you, your daughter, and your grandmother nothing but good fortune and luck. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's move on to the second story of the day. After being married for 8 years, my wife and I were finally invited to my mom's house. She was married to the most horrible man in existence, my stepfather. They had a son from hell named Lester, who was already 20 years old when we were invited to their house. For the sake of the story, I will sometimes refer to both of them as steps. When I was still living with them, Lester and I never spoke. It was as if he saw the goodness in me and was allergic to it. All he ever did when we were younger was break things or get into trouble and then blame me for it. He had it out for me from the beginning, and I assumed it was because of his father. My stepfather never tried to develop a relationship with me. All he ever did was remind me that he was in charge and that I should fear him. Since Lester was his little minion, he used him as an extension of himself. It had been a very long time since I had seen my own mother, and my wife of 8 years had never met any of my family. On the way there, I warned her that my stepfather and stepbrother were the worst people she would ever meet, and she should not feel obligated to communicate with them. She sincerely listened to my warning, like the good person she is. I wasn't worried about her being able to handle any social awkwardness or rude comments. She was a good wife. And for all I knew, my steps had changed for the better in the past decade. We arrived safely at their house, which looked exactly the same as when I left. The introductions were awkward. My steps both looked my wife up and down, not even trying to hide the fact that they were checking her out. They barely greeted me. My mom was the one attempting to have a normal social gathering. She brought dinner out on the table, where we all had to sit across from each other. The men stared at my wife like she was a television show. I asked them to stop staring at her, and that's when some yelling started. My stepdad said that I was the guest here, and he could look wherever he wanted. My stepbrother said she deserved better than me, but tried to lessen the magnitude of what he said because of my mother's reaction. I don't know how, but my mom recovered from this exchange smoothly. I think I just missed her a lot, and longed for this visit to go smoothly and peacefully. Plus, I felt like my wife and I were safe. I certainly didn't expect what was going to happen late that night. I woke up in the middle of the night in my sleeping bag on the living room floor. My wife wasn't on the couch anymore. I looked around and checked the bathroom, but still couldn't find her. Now I was groggy and growingly concerned. I didn't like that she was missing with my terrible stepfamily in the same house. I decided to check my parents' bedroom very quietly, and I only saw my mom sleeping. I checked Lester's room a little less quietly, and found the scene of a nightmare. My wife was having sex with my stepfather. I wish this was just a nightmare, but it was actually happening. My mom ran in to see what was wrong, and she saw everything too. She walked straight over to slap the hell out of my stepdad repeatedly. He actually fell over. Then she ran off and slammed the door of the bathroom. I felt so horrible. My mother shouldn't have had to see it, but these bastards didn't even care. Then I looked at my wife and demanded to know why she did this. She just sat on the bed covering her face. She started shaking like she was sobbing, and she looked up with her ugly cry face to mouth sorry to me. This didn't make any sense at all. The respectable and kind wife I knew was gone. I told my mom to come with me. We packed our stuff and went back to my house, leaving my cheating wife with my stepfamily. My mom lived with me while we both filed for divorce. She was a wreck just as much as I was, but we actually bonded and had good times together for the first time since I was really young. Before I knew it, she was making jokes about us going club hopping together. Prior to our first court date, my wife got a ride back to our neighborhood by paying for a long Uber drive. When she showed up at my door, I was very surprised and unhappy to see her. I told her I had nothing to say to her. She just needed to show up to court. She got on her knees and begged me to let her in. She just needed to get some of her stuff and figure out where to go. She hadn't been able to charge her phone for a while, and told me that it wasn't long before my stepfamily started treating her like a prisoner. I told her I would never understand why she agreed to go in that room and cheat on me. Then I slammed the door in her face and locked it. She would have no mercy or communication from me. In court, my mother got alimony. My mother received alimony from my stepfather and continued living in my house. I stayed with her for a while, but once the divorce was final, I let her rent my house cheap while I found a new place to call my home. I believed in staying close to my mother, but not that close. I needed to be independent and remain an eligible bachelor if I was to find a woman of equal quality. I got settled into my house really well before allowing any women to come over. I never saw or heard from my ex. She failed to show up to court for our divorce. I never heard from my stepfamily ever again. But I did find out that Lester was sent overseas in the army after his father died in a construction work accident. It doesn't sound like a very happy life, and that's all I'll sum them up to. I'm happy with where I ended up after losing my wife of 8 years. I hope my story stops people from cheating because it causes mass destruction and pain, hopefully more for the cheater than the victim though. Well, OP, I am sorry your wife chose to put herself in a situation that allowed for her to cheat on you. I'm not sure what she was thinking, but it's clear they were giving her attention, which indicates they thought she was attractive. Maybe she let this attention go to her head, and she simply didn't think about the consequences, or how you'd feel knowing the truth of her actions. This is just really despicable to me, that she couldn't use a little self-control and modesty to avoid breaking your heart and ending her marriage. Who knows how long she would try to hide this from you if you didn't find out. My guess is a really long time, even if her behavior changed. I'm glad you didn't have any children with her, OP. I'm glad you have a second chance, and got your mother out of a bad situation too. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.